It's time for your next favorite episode of the Integratedness Podcast with Jason and Jolene.
Wakey, wakey, eggs and bakey. It's time for the latest Integratedness Podcast with Jason and Jolene. I only say that because we record this in the morning. People could be listening at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I don't know.
As you say that dorky intro, I'm looking at the title of this episode and you've got darkness
right?
written down. And I was like, coming you from the dungeon of Jason's basement.
Right?
Wakey, wakey.
Eggs and bakey.
Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. Good evening. Good lunch break, wherever we're at.
Yeah, in your schedule. We are back with your latest favorite episode. And this week, we are continuing our rather dark trend because we've had a lot of
I mean, who likes black here, right?
Right, exactly.
I like black. Once
right?
you go black, you never go back.
Black coffee, black everything, black, you know what I'm saying? But we've touched on like cynicism, we've touched on passive aggressive behavior, we've had a very couple powerful episodes about cancer and death.
Yeah, life-changing events and losses. And
for some reason, they've been like the best received in terms of listenership we've ever had in our run of episodes, other than the Memento Mori episode, which, what does that deal with?
The
Memento
fact that
Mori.
you could die at any point.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. So I think...
Your coin, Jason, your coin.
Right. So I think this speaks to something going on.
You guys are a bunch of twisted fucks.
Right?
No, it's the real stuff. It's the stuff, like, it's really engaging, right? And I mean, everything else we talk about the dirty side of things, right? The sides that are a little crunchier that we don't always want to address. But yeah, there's definitely some interest here, and really good conversation. So that's good feedback for you guys too, right? Like when we share, I think it is at least.
I think so.
When we share the patterns of what our listeners are more attracted to, because maybe that feels validating for you and you're like, yeah, I found myself listening to that episode too. Or perhaps it was simply just the date that it was dropped and you were more available in your schedule, or maybe that crazy algorithm on Instagram just like showed you the episode that week and it hasn't been showing you our stuff prior. Who knows, right? But I do think there's a theme.
There's a theme there. And I think it's reflective of the times a bit that we're living in, which are very complex and very chaotic. But there's also, and it was a Jungian idea.
Yes, not young as in young and old.
No, but young.
As in
Jung.
Carl Jung.
Carl Jung, one of the forefathers of modern psychiatry, counseling, etc. Psychology, yeah. Where he talked about the shadow.
Yes.
That we all have a dark side to us. And one of the ways in which we can find peace and happiness is to basically understand and, I think, in a way, embrace that.
Mm-hmm. So I'm gonna talk to you a little bit about what my my little Wikipedia and Google search, so we can all get on the same page, semantically. See how you feel when you hear this. Shadow work involves working with your unconscious mind to uncover the parts of yourself that you repress and hide from yourself. This can include trauma or parts of your personality that you subconsciously consider undesirable. Anyone can do shadow work on their own. It's helpful to do it with a guide who's like a little flashlight, but essentially you're looking at a part of that, like that unconscious, the things that, when we talk about this in therapy, it's like, unconscious beliefs could be triggered by activations in our nervous system that then cause the automatic thought. There's lots of different approaches. A CBT approach might look at the automatic negative thought. The nervous system approach might look at the sympathetic activation, right? There's a lot of different approaches. One that's primarily in the psychology world and the counseling world around some of this stuff is your internal family system. So people may have heard about IFS approaches and looking at the parts and the different essentially roles and versions of us that show up at different times to provide, protection or nurturing, just different parts of us, right? So I think the most important thing here is to recognize that we might use a certain language or call it a certain thing, but I do think to some degree, everyone is doing a component of this somewhere, right? And it looks really different. So I think that's what I hope to peel apart in today's session, is to identify where some of those shadows are for you, how you are already sort of addressing them. And again, this can be in a positive way or a not so positive way in your life. And then like how to move forward, how to make space for that. What does that look like? How to start addressing that by recognizing like what is the negative impact of having too much of this in the darkness and how's that impacting my day-to-days, right?
Yeah.
The other thing I want to touch on is when people talk about shadow work, Sometimes this can come from a really spiritual place. So people might not always look at it from the psychology of that Carl Jung perspective, but they'll talk about shadow work and the darkness from a more spiritual approach as well. For myself, I hesitate to call it dark or shadow because I normalize the shit out of all of our maladaptive behaviors just to take the shame and judgment away so that it can crawl out of the closet or the shadow or the darkness and say, hey, there's room for me now. And I don't shame it away, right? So I might say something like, yeah, that would make complete sense to me that when your friend decided to do such and such, then your response would be to be jealous and become passive aggressive. And then that was essentially your own like core rooted belief in like rejection and I'm not lovable, right? That's all shadow shit. But I do not present it like that because I think when we fall into the polarity of what's good and what's bad, we make no room for integration. We just make room for separation. And when we are looking to do this work, we are looking to bounce polarity off of each other. Like we need light. We need the dark in order to see the light, and we need the light in order to see the dark. If you were to look at just the natural phenomena in life, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that we can have so many negative perceptions around some of that we're reluctant to even address that like every night it gets dark.
Well,
right?
and I'm glad you mentioned that because I think that is, I think in society we don't like to, like for one, we like to easily label certain things so we can understand it. But two, we don't like to address quote unquote the dark stuff. We always want everything to be about the light. And I think that's where, and we've done a lot in the last like 4 or 5 weeks on this show where we're talking about stuff that is people generally don't like to talk about, address, or think about as a way of normalizing that. Because I think if we're always pushing these things to the side, we're always going to have a bit of conflict in our life. We have enough conflict anyways, but I'm talking about the internal conflict, that's lack of self-esteem and self-acceptance. And it's in some of the language that is turned up, I think, in the counseling world where people are talking about always approach things with loving kindness and all this stuff, which always kind of irks me because you can't approach everything that way.
No, I talk about that lots in terms of like you can superficially renovate a room, but if there is like moldy drywall behind the wallpaper is eventually going to crumble. You can only use positive affirmation so much. So that's why I love when I get clients who have done a shitload of spiritual work and they're affirming and they're this and they're that and they're like, I'm still just like struggling so much. And I said, because like you've got all of this under there that's actually fueling unknown activations in you. So it's not that you don't have enough peace and positive practices in your life. It's that every time you do one, 4 more storms are bubbling underneath. Let's get rid of the fucking storms. You'll need half as much self-care work if we get rid of the storms. So a lot of the time when people come to me with a primary issue, whether it's relationship or job or self-based or health-based, there is usually 2 or 3 experiences in their life prior to that are fueling what's happening in the first one. Okay. So if it is around interpersonal relationships or something like that, I will say, when is the first time in your life you felt this? And guaranteed there's a time in childhood and there's a time in teen life. And most of the time you're going to originate back to a primary caregiver at some sort or something really early on in your life where that first experience came forward and it is playing out big time in your current day. Okay. I can give multiple examples of this. I'm even going through some of this in my own personal life right now. Right. And I'm so aware of it, but then I'm also aware of it for the multiple other people of what theirs are. And I was like, this isn't about me. This is about the 2 people who were in this role before me. And it sucks because we can really taint current day possibilities by having old shit paint a picture for someone or something that isn't what it is. And that's where a bit of that cynicism episode comes in, right?
For sure.
So that's where trauma responses and the way that you respond when you perceive a situation a certain way will then literally like ruin really positive possibility in front of you, right? So those are sort of pieces I want to touch on in that way. I'm curious for you, Jason, like you get to see the representation of darkness in so many of like the movies you watch and the things that you're into and being a paranormal investigator and things like that, right? Talk to me about what your experience of darkness is and even your own personal journey of addressing some of that.
Well, it's always been a part of me. And I'm sure some of that comes from like, the primal wound of adoption kind of thing. It's just there from like, birth basically. But I can remember back in the 80s, folks, that's a while ago now. remember the Clifford Olson child murders that went on. I remember watching the news, and he had been already arrested, and the police were trying to figure out where he had buried all the bodies. And there was a story that came on about how they were paying him money so that he would give the police the location of the bodies of the children that he murdered. And I remember watching that, and my adoptive mom was in the room kind of things. We're all watching the news. And I'm like, that's like, I didn't say bullshit at the time because I didn't have that language. But I said, that's crap, basically. Like, why are they paying him money? He murdered these kids. Why are they giving this guy money? He's not going to be able to spend it anyways. He's in jail. My mom's like, well, what else are they supposed to do to kind of motivate him? I'm like, and I sat for a second, and I'm like, well, I think if you start cutting off digits, he's going to start talking pretty quick. I was about 8 when this was going on. And I'll never forget that look on her face. Like, my son just said, like, we should hurt this person in order to get him to talk.
Yeah.
I didn't feel bad. To me, it was a logical way to get this piece of shit human being to speak. He's been done horrible things. He doesn't deserve to be treated any differently. And that's when I realized that there's this little dark monster inside of me. And I've been aware of it ever since.
Oh, that's interesting. And I guess like you can really peel that one apart on various different levels because that, like, again, that made sense to you. And then I think there's a higher intelligence that looks and says, how do we, because obviously he's a psychopath, right?
Yeah.
So how do we get into the mind of a psychopath? And usually it's through ego coaxing.
Yeah.
Usually it's through positive reward. Usually it's through validation and charm and things like that.
Yeah.
So negative reinforcement is actually just going to make him more rigid and get him off in a sense. Like he will like that. Like that's pleasurable.
Yeah.
It's really weird. So you look at some of that like higher intention around stuff.
Yep.
But yeah, I think your approach, most people would say, yeah, this makes no sense.
Yep.
And that makes 10 times more sense,
Yep.
right? Yeah. But that realization for you was a big one, right?
Huge one, right.
So that's something that kind of brings me to think about, and I have no facts around this, guys, but my head does this. It looks at patterns and stuff, and I'm like, how might that have come to be, right? And I think about, when we look at how shadow work or any of these like trauma components of our less best selves in the darkness, right, come forward, I wonder if organized religion had a part to play with this. Probably like Catholicism. How do you Catholicism? Can't even say it. Or Christianity, whatever the one is where you go into confession. Like, is that Catholic?
That is, well, yeah, because that's where you go in and basically you
like
talk about your sins and then you're absolved of them. Like, just like that.
I know, but why are you doing it in this box with this one person who it's one of those weird things where it's like it's shamed, but you can go, and if you talk about it, you're released of it, which is also a really fucked up thing in the brain because that does not release you of it.
It's weird. I've done it. Even though I'm not Catholic.
Okay, yeah.
Even though I'm not Catholic.
Did you burn?
No.
I'm kidding.
But it wasn't even, you didn't even go into the box like you see in the movies. It was like you go into this room and he's like on the other side of this partition, yes, but it's like this nice big room and you're kind of kneeling down. And it's not like, you don't go in and go, bless me, Father, for I have sinned or something. He kind of does this weird song thing.
Oh.
And like, what do you have to talk about, my child, kind of thing? And I'm like, well, I'm not Catholic and I've never done this before, but blah, 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 because I was just curious. Right? And it was the oddest thing. And but what was fun, what got me is he was like, well, because you're not Catholic, I can't absolve you of your sins.
Oh.
Right? He says, but I can say that I hear you and God hears you. And I'm kind of like, well, that's kind of a load of crap. Like,
yeah. No, well, I mean, yes,
I guess
no.
there's rules in a way.
He did
I mean,
hear you and
God heard you. God, but whatever. But it was just interesting that because I wasn't Catholic, though, like I wasn't part of the club, I couldn't be absolved.
Well, and it makes sense because I think in order to be, it's no different than like, I'm sorry, you can't shop at Costco because you don't have a card, right? Like that's our version of religion now.
And a whole portion of our audience
right?
just got offended.
Sorry, guys. It's a little bit of that, though. And I do think, like just like I think of it, as in like the same as my Reiki energy. And when I'm attuned and I go through my attunements at different levels, like I now have access to an energy system that perhaps someone who didn't go through that attunement got, right? So some of that, or like I only need to pay property taxes in my city, not someone else's. Yep. And like I compartmentalize things like that. Sorry, guys. But yeah, it's very interesting in that aspect. And when I look at like how people release things, like the cool thing is there's less possibility of shame when you're not seeing the person or seeing their response to you.
And
so
I think that's
lovely.
why. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's lovely. I think to tell people that if they talk about it, they're released of it, and then they can move on. No, I think that there is reconciliation that also has to complete an experience sometimes. Like if there is something we can do, and if there is something that we can choose better, I think sometimes those are really important pieces to righting a wrong, or something even internally around accountability and personal responsibility and all of those things. Because I know a lot of people who have, I don't want to say taken the get out of jail free card, but they've taken that and continue to use it. There's a difference between taking that and starting anew, right? The reborns. So I think that that's a lovely way to transform and transition. And I think there's various different ways we can do this in our life. I see it a lot in the AA community because there is so much shame in the things people do when they are abusing substances. And I think it's really beautiful to be able to really step past some of that through some of those processes. And that's through like a 12-step process of what they really, really work through in that philosophy. So I think we do this at various different accounts. I'm sure it even happens in the fitness world. It even happens in whatever other worlds, right? But essentially, the core foundation of it is like, how much do I reject what I perceive as something as wrong or bad, and how much do I allow myself to lean in, bring it closer, hug it, and heal it?
Yes, and I think that's the point of Carl Jung's idea, and I think that's the way that we should approach these parts of our personality.
Unless they're killing children.
Unless they're killing children,
fingers off.
Then we cut their fingers off.
Yeah,
yes.
Honestly, like there's like no joke around that one.
Yeah.
But essentially, you know, what happens when your child makes a poor decision? Do we push them away? Do we shame them? Initially, yeah. And then then you deal with your trigger, and then you settle your nervous system, and you do it better next time, hopefully, or like 10 times later, or continue. But essentially, you bring them closer. There's teachable moments. You move forward. Everybody nowadays looks at all of their participation in that, and we keep making changes and moving forward that way. And there's less embarrassment. There's less shame. There's so much growth that comes in sharing our most unknown parts with somebody. And I think in my field of work, that's one of the places I hold the most respect for people. And that's why I just like normalize it as like, oh yeah, it makes total sense you would do this. Yeah. And because 1, 2, 3, this would equal that, right? This is the way your brain was wired, and that would make sense that would be your response. Not ideal, probably didn't help the relationship, but it makes sense why that happened. I often talk about those behaviors like that and those patterns because that's what we're there to rewire, right? So I think some of the most profound moments for my clients are when I point out what those unconscious beliefs are, and they truly had no idea. And this happens all the time. They really came to me without an idea, and it's so validating because then it's almost like they stop wondering, what the fuck is wrong with me? Why am I doing this? And they go, oh, so perfect example. I was working with this this teenager. I think she's about 14, and she had a really tumultuous family life, and mom and dad, there was addiction, there was jail, there was lots of different things, and then living with different family members and being bounced around all over the place and stuff. And anyways, she started dating this person in high school here, and it didn't go so well. And she finally was able to leave the relationship. And she talked to me about the dynamics and how manipulative this person was and how they would fight. And there was conflict all the time. And now she's in like this safe relationship that feels really secure. And I said, yeah. And we draw pictures. We use a lot of visuals. And I circled mom and dad. And then I circled the partner. And I said, it makes a lot of sense to me that is the kind of partner you would have looked for, because that was your last experience of really close relationship and like intimate love, in a sense, right? Of like, who makes you feel familiar. And that felt really familiar. It wasn't necessarily right and healthy, but it felt so familiar. And she was like, mind blowing. She said, I have judged myself for so long being like, what was I thinking? What was wrong with me? Why would I make that decision? Because it made no sense to her. It all made sense.
Yeah.
And I do that with grown-ass adults. But to see a 14-year-old do that gives me so much hope, because I'm like, do this now so you're not 50 working through 40 years of that bullshit.
Right, exactly.
Right?
And it's one of those, it's almost like a common, we are naturally usually drawn to that which we know. We do it, but people don't consciously
We don't
realize
know.
it. We don't know. We
Yeah.
don't think about it
Yeah,
until
we
you
don't-
step back and go like, oh, wait a minute.
That's why that's
Fuck.
not working.
Right?
Yeah, and that's just the natural part of healing. That's like really strong in the attachment theory end of things. But really cool to point those things out to people as part of their transformative journey too. That makes big shifts for people.
It does. Huge
Yeah.
shifts.
So I guess for you, Jason, this is where we're going to disclose. And I mean, we're like super open on here anyways, but you know, when you talk about maybe some of your shadow work or the unconscious beliefs, what are the ones that you've primarily worked through or are working on?
I guess it kind of all stems back to that that Clifford Olson moment. It's all a lot in relation to that. Like a lot of what I've done in life is, I think there's not one particular thing that I could like draw in. There's just this side of my personality that is dark and angry, and it's there, and it fascinates me. I would never want to get rid of it. I really like it, actually.
Yeah.
I find what I've learned is that I use it as an empowering tool at moments when, normally I wouldn't. When I was younger, because I wasn't really aware of what was going on, dealing with like bullying and stuff like that. And now it's like, it's almost like it's my monster, so I know how to use it now, and like I know when to reel it back in, and that sometimes I struggle with that because maybe it goes a little too far, so I learn to reel it back in at times. But it allows me to not be taken advantage of anymore. There's a wisdom that comes with it. So like situations where you just go, I'm not getting involved in that situation, and I'm not going to, like we talked about a few weeks ago in terms of certain people, like you feel that the little spidey sense goes off about people, so you know not to let those people in. And that's basically what it's been. But you're right. It's one of those things. Like I look at all the entertainment I'm into, it's all very much reflective of that. Like the work I do in the paranormal field, it's all very reflective of that. And I guess there's portions of it that are related. We're fed by the death of my father, the vicarious trauma I experienced doing the crime work, but even becoming a crime reporter. There's people who'd be like, oh, I don't want to do that. And I'm like, yeah, I really want to do that. Like that, you know what I mean? It's just, to me, it's exciting and interesting. And I'm fascinated by even the darkness in other people and why they are the way they are.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm a bit the same way. I love going into the pain of others.
Yeah.
And I think that there's things, so I know in my actual like birth chart, my astrological chart, there's a component of me that sits in Scorpio, and all my Scorpios out there will know like what that sign goes deep into the depths and lots of darkness. And, I remember at one point Brittany was like, that's the area where you will go in deep and like somebody needs to come back and pull you out of there with a flashlight and a rope or kind of thing. Right. So I would agree that there is definitely a tendency for me to go deeper into other people's pains and stories. And I think that's why I truly love the work that I do. And people are always like, how do you not burn out? And I was like, I don't know. It's just, that's one of my gifts. That is what I'm here to do. That's why. Right. But the other thing, I think about, Jason, as you're talking about that story and just what I know about your life and stuff, it's interesting to me because I wonder if there is a part of you, and when we look at that I would say probably rejection wound, not so much abandonment from adoption, but rejection. Okay, rejection is going to bring out a piece of belonging need, and go back to all of our belonging episodes, even our chats with Julie about belonging and stuff, right? I wonder if when you can look at the extremes from other people, it helps place you at a place to be like, I am not like that person.
Yep.
Now I have a point of reference, because you didn't truly have a genetic point of reference for a long time. Like knowing you couldn't truly compare yourself against, you might have had an inner knowing of that or something.
Well,
right?
I had that all my life, even before I found out I was adopted,
Yeah,
right? You just know that there's something, you're not really a part of this. It's a family of really talented carpenters.
Yeah.
And I suck at it.
There.
Right? And you just
you're
like, what's going on?
Yeah. So we use these point of references to compare ourselves and place ourselves in a sense, right? So I wonder if you being able to kind of dive into these extremes helped you calibrate where you were on the spectrum. It helped you self-place or self-locate a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't
for
know.
sure. I think it did. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wonder if that's also a little piece of your shadow work in terms of like, how that process happens, And I would say a lot of us, most of our unconscious, the not so helpful approaches to that or habits or reflexes or whatever, responses, come from abandonment, rejection, basic feelings of I'm not good enough, or I am not enough and I'm not lovable. I would say those are the primary ones that show up 90% of the time in my sessions, unless we have really specific issues of like, I feel out of control or things like that around specific topics. But if we go to the root, the worth ones are really at the core of like when we are at our tiniest, worth, shame, those are really profound experiences. Like our kids have already established that by like 3 or 4 years old. It's so sad.
Yeah, it is.
Because we don't know that. And it sucks. It just is what it is. Right. So I would say those are some of the biggest ones. And like for myself, that rejection piece that I've talked about through like school and always making new friends every class year and all of those pieces. Right. And then through any of my like crushes and romantic relationships, always with this like anxious attachment of chasing, that rejection wound is big, right? So I would say those are big pieces that I would primarily find like my automatic response, and I have to really be on top of some of those when those ones get triggered. That would be one of my bigger shadows. And I would say the self-protection piece of distancing to prevent that.
Yep, I do that one too, actually.
Yeah. So for me, like that's a big one in my aspect. And a lot of people that I work with, and I've like openly talked about this being in a healthy relationship now, is that ability to receive love becomes so impacted by that, because there becomes this entire new experience of like, am I deserving of love because of all the negative experiences before that reinforce that you weren't? And then it's also the pieces of like, is it safe to receive it? Right. And all of those pieces then interweave in terms of, do I allow myself to be open? Do I have to protect from this because of what's happening? And it becomes so much more multifaceted. I would say I work with like over 50% of my caseload on that one. It's so common.
Yeah.
So common.
I think it's...
And a huge piece of life satisfaction.
Oh, it's like one of the biggest.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's usually the one that people struggle the most with, right? Like we've talked about this on different like, romantic episodes, like Valentine's Day ones. But yeah, it's a biggie. It
is. And it's too bad because if you were to like look around and the amount of people, and I mean, this was me 10 years ago easily, that like I would talk openly about my struggles, my wounds and stuff, but not to the depth that I'm aware of it now, and really, really actively in process of it all, right? But there's so many people. You could come across 20 people. We could be in a room with 20 people here, and probably not you and I, because we would choose those 20 people differently. But if they were just random 20 people, I love people watching and seeing where people put these masks on, where they're like trying to be more confident than they really are. And you're like, I wish you would just say that you are nervous about this such and such, because this odd behavior that's coming out right now is making the 3 people beside you uncomfortable. It's making one person super annoyed with you because they know you're bullshitting, right? Like,
did I tell you about the gym
all
people?
Of that play out. Yeah.
I told you about the gym people,
totally,
right? Like that was a few episodes ago now, but yeah, like it's good God.
And for you, that's one approach. And then I bet there's somebody you could watch, and maybe if you followed them personally, you wouldn't even make a judgment about them doing the same thing those girls were, because you'd be like, oh yeah, they run this page on like women's hormone health. Yep. And like you might have a totally different respect for the exact same behavior.
Yeah.
So it's also some of these things. And I think what's key there is like authenticity, right? That didn't feel authentic with those gals taking selfies, but maybe there would be someone where it was in alignment of what their message was in life and what they were doing. Maybe they were on their own journey and they were like taking pictures to keep track of their weight and share their progress.
And that makes perfect sense, right?
Whatever it is, right? Yep. But I mean, I think we can pick up that sensation that we get where we're like, oh my God, this is so inauthentic. And I think that becomes a little bit of the alarm system that starts to go off for us, right? And in those moments, I guess where we can take this a step further is like, how do we shine light on that in a loving way instead of a judgmental way, right? So when we see that in somebody else, how can we say, hey, I see your discomfort, and instead of saying you're a fucking douchebag or you're this or that, how do we encourage that to come closer and nourish it, hug it? Like, hey, like how do you get more curious about making that person feel more comfortable, or, giving them a kudos of like, hey, you did really great in class today, or because what is it that they're, that's activated for them, right? And those are like deep places. Those are where we really take it a step further, right? And this is where we can take somebody's triggered behavior and hopefully, not, even if we do get triggered by it initially, stop, pause, and say, okay, how can I embrace this rather than push it away? Does that make sense?
It does, I think it does up to a point.
Up to a point.
Because the other person has to be aware of it.
Yes. Well, maybe not.
But they also have to want to change.
Yep. But they might not even be there yet.
And they also have to think that they can change.
Yes, but they might not even be there
They might
yet.
not. And it's getting to that point. But I believe, just from my own experience, people who are of my age bracket, who they don't want to change and they're never gonna.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's the point, which is kind of sad, because you can see them getting there.
Yeah.
But after 40 years of trying to help them get there, and the same response for 40 years, they're not changing.
In a sense, I don't know. This is where the two of us differ on like how we can shift people's behaviors. We can manipulate situations in whatever way possible. And it's really easy to pull people out. Goes back to that psyche around Clifford Olson too, right? So like you can take someone who's really rigid, who's really like, screw that, I'm not open to it, this or that. And like, there are definitely ways that you can play with that sense of protection, sense of safety, reassurance, all of those pieces. And eventually, like, people do everything for good reason for themselves, for good reason. Like all of our maladaptive coping skills, they're there for a good reason, not for healthy reasons, but for good reason. We have a reason why they're there. I'm always curious about that part, right?
Yeah.
And it was interesting. I was talking to this one client, and him and his son go to the gym, and his son's like a later teen kind of thing. And he's like, am I awkward when I'm talking? Because a lot of the men are like in their 50s, 60s when they go or whatever. And he's like, am I awkward? Like, am I saying weird things? And his dad was like, no, you're having like good conversation. So for that young guy, it's really uncomfortable because he's not used to face. He lives in a digital world, right? And for the old guys, they're probably used to seeing all these people just taking videos of themselves at the gym or being on their phones or doing a couple reps and then going back on their phone. And like, there is a whole judgment about like, what are you doing? The generation differences don't make sense anymore.
No, they're hugely different.
So I said, it's really cool that your son is able to offer them maybe a more positive view of that generation. And then your son's able to get a more positive view of, hey, cool. You know what? These old guys aren't so bad. We're having this cool conversation, or, kind of neat that here they are at this age and they're able to bench press more than me, or things like that. Right. So I really like some of those stages where we can kind of play off of each other's judgments, wounding, whatever that looks like. Right.
Yeah.
Because there are such differences nowadays in generations, for sure. Like more so than I think we've ever had.
Oh, bigger than like the difference between myself and my dad.
Oh, for sure.
Like there's a lot more similarities,
Yeah,
right?
I think...
Even though they grew up and saw a lot of changes, but I think like Jolene, you and I, we've probably seen 4 extreme technological advances in the span of our lifetime. Like, I mean, bigger than any that changed the way that we live more than any other generation.
That's only about 50% of what our parents have witnessed in terms of change of civilization, and the generations below us have maybe seen a third of it.
Yeah.
I can understand what my mom and grandparents went through, but I don't think kids have any understanding of even what grandparents go through.
Yeah, at all.
It's so like we're shortening that frame of reference now.
Yeah.
Because it's just moving so rapidly. Like it is very untangible. It's not really touchable. It doesn't apply. Like I talked about that in the voting, right? Like how young people, I was like, it's not really that important to them because they've never known what life without freedom was. Whereas we do, because we saw our parents impacted by it.
Yeah. And I talked to our grandparents who fought for it, right?
Like, who fought for it. But the generation below us has no idea because it never tangibly touched their existence. So it's further away, right? Yeah. It's further away. So in terms of how does this impact you guys? What kinds of things do we talk about that highlight some of those unconscious pieces for you? If the word darkness resonates for you, great. If it doesn't, then use things like, what are my automatic thoughts, my automatic negative belief, my ants, right? That's a very CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy approach. You might look at it from like a neurological and like nervous system type approach of what, or like a, polyvagal theory around what activates me? Like, when do I get the most pissy? When do I get the most jealous? When do I get the most anxious? Those might be your little moments of darkness, right? Mm-hmm. What do I hate when people point out? What makes me insecure before I leave the house? Those are some of those pieces. And then we can take that, like, oh, I always worry that my hair is not good enough. Okay, well, what's the root of that? Like, well, I want to look good. Okay, well, what does that mean? Does it mean that you don't want to be misunderstood? Does it mean that you are worried about rejection? What's the core worry, right? All of those pieces. And then ask yourself, like, where does this help me? So where do these responses, behaviors, protective mechanisms, where does sitting in this darkness help me? And then the other piece is, where does it hinder me, right? Mm-hmm. Where does it damage my relationships? In your experience, where has some of that damaged yours?
I just have a lack of patience for certain behaviors.
Yeah.
I have a big thing with people who don't listen, especially when you've explained it 3 or 4 times.
So thank you guys for listening.
That's right. And this is going to come up a bit in the next episode. I have a real problem with people's lack of resilience and an unwillingness to change. Do you know what I mean? Like that's something that I really, really bothers me. And I think it's because and we've talked about this, I've worked really hard to get to where I get to. And like you, like I know that you've said that the core belief of social work is everyone's ability to change. Mm-hmm. But that change takes a boatload of work. And if I can do it, as far as I'm concerned, anyone can. Mm-hmm. And it bothers me when people don't want to put that effort in. Yeah,
everybody has the ability to change. I innately believe that. And there are multiple factors that contribute to whether people can or not. And it could be resources. It could be self-confidence. It could be desire to. So there's always a difference between how confident you are you can change and how important it is to change. Mm-hmm. That's huge in any kind of like addiction work or even like exercise and all those things. How important is it or how confident are you? Because it can be really important, but you have no confidence. Or you can have a shitload of confidence, but not important, right?
Yeah.
And we've talked about that in some change episodes too. And then, other things I also believe, and I'm really open about this, is our timelines. And in this lifetime, where are we supposed to advance to, and do we? And I think that my perspective is that our souls here are they are here for multiple different experiences. And in this lifetime, what are the biggest things I am working through and working towards and advancing? And some people are simply in the introduction phase and they are nowhere near advancing to the capacity of maybe somebody else who's had a bit more practice around the block. Mm-hmm. So those are things I embrace as well. And then also what the impact of our change has on everyone else in our life, right? Because our timelines impact other people's timelines, right? And like there's a reason why you and I are here at the same time that maybe a president is in charge down south. Like, why weren't we here 40 years ago? Why weren't we here? Well, I don't mean like,
yeah, I know what you
were.
mean.
I was. Fuck, okay, like, like 300 years ago, what might that have looked like, right?
Yeah.
So those are also things where I just go like literally to another planet and consider. And I don't sweat the small stuff because I'm like, okay, maybe this is just the path of this lifetime, right? And sometimes that is a really great way to just like step back and be less impacted by some of those direct things. And also, Jason, I encourage you to look at that. Like, is it a lack of patience? Is it frustration with people who don't want to change? Or is there this little grinchy heart in there that's getting bigger and bigger? And it's like, you know what? I saw the bullshit I went through. I saw how hard I kept myself there. And fuck, it feels good to be out of that now. And like, you could do the same if you just pulled your head out of your ass.
That's basically where it comes down to, is that last point. Yeah.
I actually think, Jason, that you have a more loving, it's more of a like, man, wake up because this could be really good for you. But instead you sound like a jerk when you're saying it. But I see your care and compassion and desire for people to change. And that's why you're here.
Right? Humbug.
Yeah. Some people need a little spanking to get that to happen, and other people just need their hand held, and that's what we're both here for.
There's a line in the movie Seven that I really like, although the bad guy says it. Mm-hmm. John Doe is like, in this day and age, you can't go tap people on the shoulder anymore. Sometimes you need to hit them with a sledgehammer.
There we go, folks.
I think I found the quote that'll be the title for this episode.
No, I think it needs to be something like the darkness, the dark side. What is that? I mean, Star Wars talks about this so huge, right? Like my one daughter is reading some Star Wars books for her bedtime reading. My dad, my sister were always into that. I'm never into sci-fi stuff. Like, I like the real stuff. I'm like, show me the fucked up person. Like, I don't know who these people are. Like, what do you mean? Like, all I know is that Luke's father is Darth Vader.
Yeah.
I thought that like Luke and Princess Leia were boyfriend and girlfriend, but they're brother sister. Like,
yeah, they didn't know that either, which that could be a whole episode.
So that's fine,
right there.
Yeah. Welcome to Westworld. So, anyways, though, like, I think we do a pretty good job in like pop culture to address light and dark. There's definitely a play off of it in so many different shows. There's always a villain. Look at Disney, right? And I love how they've been able to highlight strengths of the villain, right? Like, I feel like there's a whole, I've never seen it, but like that whole Descendants thing, and like popularize liking the villains. And I actually think that's a beautiful advancement in us embracing the darkness.
Well, that was how the whole story with Darth Vader ended.
Oh, okay.
Where he switched. The good in him came out.
Aw,
right?
Like you.
Like me. I'm Darth Vader.
I like that.
I've always, like, that's, pop culture. Like the shows like Daredevil and stuff like that, where the hero is also, the contradictions in character. There's so much of it.
Like
There's
Deadpool.
so much. Deadpool, Batman. Right? Like, you know what I mean? There's tons of stuff.
Totally.
Anyway.
I hope that shed a little bit of shadow and darkness into your day, because honestly, sometimes if we find just the right shadow and the right light, shit looks amazing.
It does.
Right?
It does. That nice contrast of the
there we go.
colors. So there. Thank you for tuning in.
Thanks for listening to Jason.
Right? We appreciate that. Now listen to what we told you.
Yeah.
And we're back next week with your next favorite episode of the End of Greatness podcast with Jason and Jolene. Guess who I am?
I had so many answers and nothing came out. That's Jason. I'm Jolene. We'll see you next week.